Black farmer disappeared in 1983. 29 years later his wallet was found in a tree. The morning mist clung to the red clay fields of Millbrook County like secrets nobody wanted to tell. Elijah Carter stood at the edge of his 40-acre farm, watching the sun paint the cotton rose gold. In his weathered hands he held a manila folder that would change everything, or destroy him trying. "Daddy, you sure about this?" His daughter Sarah's voice carried across the porch, heavy with worry that had been building for weeks. Elijah turned, his dark eyes reflecting both determination and something that looked dangerously close to fear. "Some things are bigger than being sure, baby girl. Some things are just right." The folder contained papers that would make history in Millbrook County. An interracial farming cooperative between him and Thomas Granger, his white neighbor. Two men who had worked side by side for 3 decades despite the invisible lines that separated their worlds. Today, they would make those lines disappear forever. But someone else had different plans. 3 miles away, in a glass office tower that seemed to mock the humble farmhouses below, Henry Caldwell studied aerial photographs of the county with the cold precision of a chess master. Each farm was marked with colored pins, red for acquired, yellow for negotiating, blue for resistant. The Carter and Granger properties sat stubbornly blue in the center of his empire. "Mr. Caldwell," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The Carter situation needs immediate attention. If those papers get signed tomorrow." "They won't." Caldwell's voice carried the weight of a man who had never heard the word no and intended to keep it that way. He reached for his phone, dialing a number he'd used before when legal methods proved insufficient. Back at the Carter farm, Elijah kissed his wife Marla goodbye, the gesture lingering longer than usual. She held his face in her hands, reading the worry lines that had deepened over the past month. "Those calls we've been getting, the men asking questions around town. Elijah, maybe we should wait. Let things cool down. Marla, honey, if we wait for the world to be ready for change, we'll be waiting forever." He pressed the folder against his chest. "Thomas and me, we've been talking about this for years. Sharing equipment, combining our harvests, showing these folks that black and white farmers can work together. Can make something beautiful together. And what about that Caldwell man? The one buying up all the land for his factory?" Elijah's jaw tightened. "That's exactly why we can't wait. He's picked off every small farmer in 3 counties. But if Thomas and I merge our operations, create something bigger, stronger, we might just have a fighting chance." The drive to the Granger farm took 15 minutes through winding back roads lined with pecan trees and dying tobacco fields. Elijah had made this journey thousands of times, but today felt different. The very air seemed to crackle with possibility and danger. Thomas Granger stood waiting by his mailbox, a tall, lanky man whose hands told the same story of honest work as Elijah's. They had been friends since childhood, back when such friendships had to be hidden from parents and neighbors who would never understand. "You bring the papers?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Right here." Elijah patted the folder. "Thomas, you know there's no going back from this. Once we sign, once word gets out. Hell, Elijah, I've been thinking about nothing else for weeks. My own nephew won't speak to me since he heard rumors. Half the town thinks I've lost my mind." Thomas kicked at the red dirt with his boot. "But you know what? Maybe it's time this town lost its mind a little. Maybe it's time we all woke up." They walked toward Thomas's farmhouse, unaware that a black sedan had been following Elijah from the moment he left home. Unaware that Henry Caldwell's patience had finally run out. Unaware that this would be the last conversation anyone would remember having with Elijah Carter. Inside the Granger kitchen, the 2 men spread the papers across a wooden table that had witnessed 3 generations of family meals. The cooperative agreement was 12 pages of legal language that boiled down to something revolutionary. 2 farmers, different colors, same dreams. "Initial here, here, and here," Thomas said, his finger tracing the signature lines. "Tomorrow morning, we make it official." But as Elijah reached for the pen, the sound of car doors slamming echoed from the front yard. Both men froze. Through the kitchen window, They could see two large men in expensive suits walking toward the house with the purposeful stride of men who never took no for an answer. "Mr. Granger! Mr. Carter!" The voice boomed across the yard. "We need to talk." Thomas's face went pale. "Those are Caldwell's men. I've seen them around town, asking questions, making offers." Elijah's hand instinctively moved to protect the folder. "What kind of offers?" "The kind you don't refuse." The knock on the door came hard and insistent. Thomas looked at Elijah, and in that moment, both men understood that their simple dream of cooperative farming had collided with forces much larger and more dangerous than they had imagined. "We could pretend we're not here," Thomas whispered. "They saw my truck," Elijah replied. "And men like that don't just go away." As Thomas moved toward the door, Elijah made a decision that would haunt his family for decades. He tucked the folder inside his jacket and whispered, "If something happens to me, make sure Sarah knows what we were trying to do here. Make sure she knows it was worth it." The door opened, and everything changed. What happened next in that kitchen would remain a mystery for 29 years. By sunset, Elijah Carter's truck would be found abandoned on a country road 5 miles away, keys still in the ignition. The folder would be gone. Thomas Granger would tell the sheriff that Elijah never showed up for their meeting. And Henry Caldwell would sleep peacefully in his mansion, knowing that his factory would face no further obstacles. But secrets have a way of surviving, even when the people who keep them don't. And sometimes, it takes a generation for the truth to find its way home. 29 years later, the October wind carried the smell of dying leaves and forgotten dreams across the Carter farm. Maya Carter stood in her rental car, staring at the house where her grandfather had once lived, where her mother Sarah had grown up carrying the weight of an unsolved mystery. The funeral had been 3 days ago. Breast cancer had taken Sarah at 58, leaving Maya as the last of the Carter line and the unwilling inheritor of 40 acres of memories she'd spent most of her adult life trying to escape. "I should have come back sooner," Maya whispered to the empty fields, her law degree and Atlanta apartment feeling suddenly insignificant against the red clay that had shaped 3 generations of her family. She'd driven down from the city to handle the estate, planning to sell everything and return to her orderly life of corporate contracts and billable hours. But standing here now, surrounded by the ghosts of her grandfather's dreams, something felt different. Something felt unfinished. Maya walked toward the old oak tree that stood sentinel between the house and the fields. Her mother had always said it was Elijah's favorite spot, where he would sit on summer evenings and plan the next day's work. The tree had grown massive over the decades, its trunk thick enough to hide secrets. As she circled the ancient oak, running her fingers along its weathered bark, Maya noticed something strange. About 8 feet up, a section of the trunk had grown around what looked like foreign material. She could see the edge of something dark leather peeking through the bark that had slowly consumed it over the years. "What in the world?" Maya muttered, pulling out her phone to use as a flashlight. The leather was old, cracked, but unmistakably part of something that had been deliberately placed in a hollow of the tree decades ago. Maya looked around the property until she found her grandfather's old toolshed, still stocked with equipment that Sarah had never been able to bring herself to sell. Armed with a small hatchet and a pry bar, Maya carefully worked to free whatever had been hidden in the tree. The bark had grown thick around it, protecting it from decades of weather like nature's own time capsule. After 20 minutes of careful work, a leather wallet fell into her hands. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Even aged and weathered, she recognized it immediately from old family photos. This was her grandfather's wallet, the one he'd carried every day until the day he disappeared. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside, preserved by the dry hollow of the tree, were items that made her heart race. A folded document with Carter Granger Cooperative Farming Agreement printed at the top. Her grandfather's signature was there, bold and confident, but Thomas Granger's line remained empty. The date was October 15, 1983, the day before Elijah vanished. A black and white photograph showed 2 men shaking hands in front of a farmhouse. Even faded with age, Maya could see the hope in their faces, the revolutionary nature of what they were attempting. One man was clearly her grandfather. The other must be Thomas Granger. A small brass key, tarnished but intact, with numbers etched on its surface. SD 247 First National Bank. Most disturbing of all was a torn page from what looked like a notebook, its edges brown with what appeared to be dried blood. In her grandfather's handwriting, she could make out partial words. "Caldwell's men threatens tell Sarah if..." Maya sank to the ground beside the oak tree, the wallet's contents spread around her like pieces of a puzzle that had been waiting 29 years to be solved. "Grandfather, what happened to you?" she whispered. The torn, blood-stained page told a story of violence that official reports had never mentioned. The signed agreement proved her grandfather had been moving forward with plans that someone desperately wanted stopped. And the key suggested Elijah had been preparing for something, hiding evidence somewhere safe. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her law firm. "When are you coming back? The Morrison case needs immediate attention." She stared at the message, then at the wallet in her hands. For the first time in her career-focused life, billable hours seemed less important than family truth. Her grandfather hadn't just disappeared, he'd been silenced. And someone had wanted the world to forget about his dreams of cooperation and change. But Maya was a lawyer. She understood evidence. She understood justice. And she understood that some mysteries demanded answers, no matter how many years had passed. Standing up, she carefully gathered the wallet's contents and walked back toward the house. Inside her rental car, she pulled out her laptop and began researching everything she could find about Henry Caldwell, Thomas Granger, and the industrial development that had transformed Millbrook County in the 1980s. What she found made her blood run cold. Caldwell Industries had built their massive factory exactly where they'd planned, but only after acquiring dozens of small farms through aggressive buyouts and suspicious circumstances. Several farmers had sold their land for far less than market value after receiving visits from unnamed representatives. And Thomas Granger? According to public records, he'd sold his farm to Caldwell Industries just 6 months after Elijah's disappearance, then moved out of state and died in a car accident 2 years later. Maya closed her laptop and looked out at the fields her grandfather had loved. Tomorrow, she would drive to First National Bank and see what that key unlocked. Tomorrow, she would start asking questions that people had been avoiding for 3 decades. Tonight, she would stay in her grandfather's house and feel the weight of unfinished business settle around her shoulders like a mantle she was finally ready to wear. Maya's first stop the next morning was the Millbrook County Diner, where gossip flowed as freely as the coffee and memories ran deeper than the red clay beneath the foundation. She needed to understand what people remembered about 1983, and in small southern towns, diners were libraries of collective memory. The bell above the door announced her arrival, and conversations paused as heads turned to study the newcomer. Maya had forgotten how quickly news traveled in places like this. "You must be Sarah Carter's girl," said Dolores Manning, the waitress who'd been serving coffee since before Maya was born. "Heard you were in town for the funeral. Sorry for your loss, honey." "Thank you. I'm actually staying a few extra days to handle some family business." Maya settled into a corner booth, noting how several patrons were openly staring. "I've been learning about my grandfather, Elijah Carter. About what happened when he disappeared." The diner went quiet enough to hear the coffee pot gurgling. Dolores poured Maya's coffee with hands that trembled slightly. "That was a long time ago, sugar. Some things are better left buried." "But they're not buried, are they?" Maya pulled out the old photograph of Elijah and Thomas shaking hands. "They're just hidden." An elderly black man at the counter turned around. Maya recognized him as Reverend Moses Jackson from the Baptist church her family had attended. "Child, you stirring up waters that been still for near 30 years. Your granddaddy was a good man, but he got mixed up in things that weren't his business." "What things?" Maya pressed. "The farming cooperative? 2 neighbors working together? It wasn't just about farming," Reverend Jackson said quietly, glancing around nervously. "There were powerful people who didn't want to see that kind of collaboration. People who had money invested in keeping things the way they were." Before Maya could ask more questions, The diner door swung open with such force it rattled the windows. A tall, red-faced man in his 50s strode in, his eyes immediately finding Maya. "You the Carter girl asking questions about ancient history?" Maya stood up, her lawyer instincts kicking in. "I'm Maya Carter, yes. And you are?" "James Granger. Thomas Granger was my uncle." His voice carried a mixture of anger and something that looked like fear. "I heard you've been showing around old pictures, stirring up talk about things that are finished and buried. Mr. Granger, I'm just trying to understand what happened to my grandfather." "Your grandfather got himself finished because he wouldn't listen to reason." The words exploded out of James before he could stop them. The entire diner fell silent. He quickly glanced around, realizing his mistake. "I mean, he disappeared because he was mixed up with people who didn't have his best interests at heart." Maya felt her pulse quicken. "What people? And how do you know he was finished if he just disappeared?" James Granger's face went pale. "I don't know nothing for certain. Just rumors. Old talk. What happened to your Uncle Thomas after my grandfather disappeared?" "Uncle Thomas sold the farm and moved away. Said he couldn't handle the memories." James's voice was getting defensive. "Look, Miss Carter, I don't know what you think you're gonna find, but some stones are better left unturned." "Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice." James Granger's eyes were hard now. "This town has moved on. We got jobs at the Caldwell factory, decent wages, good benefits. Nobody wants to go back to the old days of struggling small farms and complications." Reverend Jackson cleared his throat. "Maya, child, walk with me outside." Once they were on the sidewalk, away from listening ears, the Reverend's demeanor changed completely. "That boy James, he's scared. His whole family's been scared since 1983. Reverend Jackson looked around nervously. "Your granddaddy and Thomas, they were planning something bigger than just sharing equipment. They were talking about challenging the whole system. Showing that black and white farmers could be equals, partners. What's so threatening about that? Henry Caldwell had plans for this whole county. Bought up most of the small farms, built his factory where the best farmland used to be. But if your granddaddy and Thomas had succeeded, if they'd started something that spread to other farmers, it would have changed everything." "Exactly. And there were people who had a lot of money invested in making sure nothing changed." The Reverend paused. "Maya, your granddaddy wasn't just threatened. Word around town was that Caldwell had connections to people who made problems disappear permanently." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of connections?" "The kind that don't leave witnesses. Your granddaddy knew he was in danger. Last time I saw him, Sunday before he vanished, he told me he'd hidden some insurance. Said if anything happened to him, somebody would eventually find the truth." "Insurance?" "Evidence. Documents. Proof of what they were planning to do to stop the cooperative." Reverend Jackson grabbed Maya's arm gently. "Child, you found something, didn't you? Something your granddaddy left behind?" Maya nodded slowly, thinking of the safety deposit box key burning in her pocket. "Then you be careful. Henry Caldwell died 5 years ago, but his son runs the business now. And some secrets are worth finishing for, even after all these years." As Maya walked back to her car, she noticed a black SUV that had been parked across from the diner when she arrived was now following her at a distance. Her grandfather's story wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about the present, and someone was still very interested in keeping it buried. Maya drove the 30 miles to First National Bank in the county seat, checking her rearview mirror every few seconds. The black SUV had disappeared after she left Millbrook, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left her shoulders. First National was an old brick building that had served the county since the 1940s. Inside, the marble floors and wooden teller windows spoke of an era when banking was personal and secrets were kept in small metal boxes rather than computer databases. "I need to access a safety deposit box," Maya told the elderly clerk, sliding the brass key across the counter along with her identification and her grandfather's death certificate. The clerk, whose nameplate read, "Mrs. Dorothy Fleming," examined the key with practiced eyes. Box 247. That's been inactive for quite some time. She pulled out a thick ledger book. Last access was October 14, 1983. Maya's heart skipped. The day before her grandfather disappeared. I'll need to verify your authorization, Mrs. Fleming continued, pulling out forms that looked as old as the building itself. After 20 minutes of paperwork and phone calls to verify Maya's legal standing as sole heir, they walked down narrow stairs to the basement vault. The safety deposit box area felt like a tomb, with rows of small metal doors stretching into shadows. Box 247 was in the back corner, as if it had been deliberately placed where few people would notice it. Mrs. Fleming inserted her master key, then nodded for Maya to use her grandfather's key. The lock turned with a click that seemed to echo through 29 years of silence. Inside the metal box, Maya found her grandfather's legacy of evidence. The full cooperative farming agreement, notarized and ready to be filed with the county clerk. Unlike the partial copy in the wallet, this version contained detailed financial projections, shared resource allocations, and most importantly, expansion plans. Elijah and Thomas hadn't just been planning to merge their two farms. They'd been creating a model that could spread throughout the county. A manila envelope labeled Caldwell Evidence contained documents that made Maya's hands shake. Property acquisition records showing Henry Caldwell had systematically bought up farms for far below market value. Letters from local officials promising favorable zoning changes in exchange for consulting fees. Bank statements showing large cash payments to unnamed recipients in the weeks before several farmers suddenly decided to sell. Another envelope held correspondence between Elijah and Thomas, dated throughout September and October 1983. Maya read her grandfather's careful handwriting. Thomas, the pressure is getting worse. 2 more visits this week from Caldwell's men. They're not making offers anymore, they're making threats. Marla is scared, but we can't back down now. Too much depends on what we're doing. Thomas, found out today that Sheriff Morrison is on Caldwell's payroll. Can't trust local law enforcement. If something happens to me, everything is in the bank box. Make sure Sarah knows her daddy died fighting for something that mattered. The final letter was dated October 14, 1983. Thomas, they know about our signing ceremony tomorrow. Someone leaked the information. I'm moving the evidence tonight before they can destroy it. If I don't make it to your place tomorrow, you'll know why. Don't let them silence both of us. The truth has to survive somehow. But the most shocking discovery was a stack of photographs. Maya's hands trembled as she flipped through black and white images of a burned barn, taken from multiple angles. The structure was completely destroyed, nothing left but charred beams and ash. On the back of one photo, in her grandfather's handwriting, My barn, October 10, 1983. Arson. Insurance investigator paid off, no official report filed. Maya had never heard about any fire. Her mother had never mentioned a barn burning down just days before Elijah's disappearance. The final item in the box was a small tape recorder with a cassette still inside. Maya's pulse quickened as she recognized her grandfather's voice speaking in urgent whispers. This is Elijah Carter, October 14, 1983. If someone is listening to this, it means I didn't survive what's coming. Henry Caldwell has been systematically destroying small farmers in this county. He's got officials in his pocket, law enforcement looking the other way, and men who make problems disappear permanently. Thomas Granger and I tried to stand up to him, tried to show that farmers could work together regardless of color. But Caldwell won't let that happen. He burned my barn 4 days ago as a warning. Tomorrow, he'll probably come for me. I'm hiding this evidence where my grandbaby might find it someday. Maya, if you're hearing this, don't let them win. Don't let my death be for nothing. The truth is all here. Use it. Maya sat in the small viewing room, surrounded by 29 years of hidden truth. Her grandfather hadn't just been finished, he'd been systematically terrorized, his property destroyed, his dreams crushed by a conspiracy that reached into every level of local power. But he'd been smart enough to preserve the evidence. Smart enough to hide it where time would eventually bring it to someone who could fight back. Maya carefully repacked everything into the metal box, her mind already working through legal strategies. This wasn't just about solving her grandfather's finishing anymore. This was about exposing a pattern of corruption and violence that had shaped an entire county. As she climbed the stairs back to the main floor of the bank, Maya felt her grandfather's presence with her. He'd waited 29 years for justice. The wait was finally over. Maya returned to her grandfather's house with the weight of evidence burning in her briefcase. As she climbed the porch steps, she noticed the front door was slightly ajar. Her blood ran cold. She was certain she'd locked it before leaving for the bank. Inside, the house had been subtly disturbed. Drawers pulled out just enough to show they'd been searched, papers scattered across her mother's old desk. Someone had been looking for something. Maya's hands shook as she called the local police, only to remember Reverend Jackson's warning about corruption. Instead, she called her law partner in Atlanta. "Maya, where the hell are you?" David's voice crackled through the phone. "The Morrison case is falling apart without you. David, I need you to file some documents with the State Attorney General's office. I'm sending you evidence of a conspiracy that involves arson and corruption dating back 30 years. What are you talking about? Come back to Atlanta and we'll discuss whatever small-town nonsense you've gotten mixed up in. My grandfather was finished, David. And I can prove it." Maya hung up and began carefully photographing every document from the safety deposit box. If someone was watching her, she needed backup copies of everything. As she worked, she heard her mother's voice in her memory, talking about the boxes of belongings they'd never gone through after Elijah's disappearance. The attic ladder creaked under her weight as she climbed into the dusty space above the house. Boxes labeled "Mama's Things" and "Elijah's Personal" sat covered in 3 decades of dust. Maya had avoided going through them after her grandmother's death, the pain too fresh, the mysteries too deep. In the third box, beneath old quilts and family photographs, Maya found a small wooden chest she'd never seen before. Inside was a cassette tape with "For Maya Only," written in her mother's careful handwriting. Maya's heart pounded as she carried the tape player downstairs and pressed play. Her grandmother Marla's voice filled the room, shaky with age and weighted with secrets. "Maya, baby, if you're hearing this, then your mama finally told you about your granddaddy's things. Or maybe you found them yourself. I've been carrying this burden for 30 years, and I can't take it to my grave. The night your granddaddy disappeared, I wasn't asleep like I told everyone. I was watching from the kitchen window, worried sick about him coming home so late from the Granger place. Around midnight, I saw 2 big trucks pull up in our yard. Men got out, white men in suits I'd never seen before. They were dragging someone. I could hear your granddaddy's voice, weak but still fighting. 'You can't stop what's already started,' he kept saying. They had him by the arms, blood on his shirt. One of them was shouting about papers, about where he'd hidden something. Your granddaddy looked right at this window, right at me, and mouthed the word run. But I was too scared, baby. Too scared to help him, too scared to call for help. I watched them put him in the back of one truck and drive toward the woods behind our property. I never saw him again. The next morning, when the sheriff came asking questions, I lied. I said I'd been asleep, hadn't heard nothing. I was terrified they'd come for me next, or for your mama. I thought if I kept quiet, we'd be safe. But keeping quiet didn't keep us safe. It just kept the truth buried. Your granddaddy died because he believed in something beautiful, that people of different colors could work together, build something together. And I let his finishers walk free. I'm sorry, Maya. I'm so sorry I was too afraid to speak up. I'm sorry I let you grow up without knowing what a hero your granddaddy was. If you're hearing this, please don't let my cowardice be his final legacy. Find the truth. Make them pay." The tape ended, leaving Maya sitting in stunned silence. Her grandmother had witnessed her grandfather's finishing and kept silent for 30 years. The guilt and fear in Marla's voice was heartbreaking, but the information was crucial. Elijah had been taken toward the woods behind their property. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or join your grandfather." Before she could process the threat fully, a black sedan pulled into her driveway. A man in his 40s got out, expensive suit and confident stride marking him as someone used to getting his way. Maya met him on the porch, her phone ready to record everything. "Miss Carter, I'm Robert Caldwell, Henry Caldwell's son. I hear you've been asking questions about ancient history. Mr. Caldwell, I've been investigating my grandfather's finishing. Would you like to comment on your father's involvement?" Robert Caldwell's composed facade cracked slightly. "My father built this county. Created jobs, brought prosperity. Whatever happened 30 years ago was business." "Business? Is that what you call arson?" "Careful, Miss Carter. You're making accusations you can't prove." Maya pulled out her phone and played a portion of her grandfather's tape from the safety deposit box. "Henry Caldwell has been systematically destroying small farmers in this county." Caldwell's face went white. "Where did you get that?" "My grandfather was smarter than your father gave him credit for. He documented everything. Every bribe, every threat, every crime." Maya stepped closer. "The question is, how far are you willing to go to protect your father's legacy? You have no idea what you're dealing with. My father did what was necessary to bring progress to this backward county. A few stubborn farmers weren't going to stop economic development." Caldwell's mask finally slipped completely. "Your grandfather chose his fate when he refused to sell. When he started filling other farmers' heads with ideas about cooperation and equality. Some changes are too dangerous to allow." Maya's phone was recording every word. "Are you admitting your father had my grandfather finished?" Caldwell seemed to realize what he'd said. His voice turned cold. "I'm admitting nothing. But I am telling you that some family legacies are worth protecting, no matter the cost. Consider this your final warning." As he drove away, Maya realized she now had enough evidence to bring down an empire built on blood and lies. But she also knew the danger was just beginning. Maya didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her grandfather's kitchen table, organizing evidence and making copies of everything. By dawn, she had contacted the FBI field office in Atlanta, the state attorney general, and 3 investigative journalists. If Robert Caldwell wanted to silence her, he'd have to silence everyone. The FBI arrived first, 2 agents who listened with growing amazement as Maya laid out 30 years of buried evidence. Agent Patricia Williams, a black woman about Maya's age, studied the documents with particular intensity. "Miss Carter, this is one of the most comprehensive cases of organized corruption we've seen. The recordings alone are enough to reopen the investigation, but combined with the documentary evidence." Agent Williams shook her head. "Your grandfather was building a case that could have changed everything." "He did change everything," Maya replied. "Just not the way he intended." Within hours, search warrants were being executed across the county. The woods behind the Carter farm yielded the most heartbreaking discovery: human remains buried in a shallow grave, along with fragments of burned documents, and a second set of remains that DNA testing would later confirm as Thomas Granger. The truth Maya uncovered shattered the town's carefully constructed silence. Thomas Granger hadn't fled to another state and died in an accident. He'd been finished the same night as Elijah, finished for refusing to abandon their partnership even after witnessing what happened to his friend. Robert Caldwell was arrested at his corporate headquarters, charged with conspiracy after the fact. The recorded conversation where he'd essentially confessed to his father's crimes became the centerpiece of a case that would eventually expose corruption reaching into 3 counties. But Maya's work wasn't finished. Standing in the courthouse steps after Caldwell's arraignment, she faced a crowd of reporters and townspeople who had gathered to hear the truth they'd been denied for 3 decades. "My grandfather Elijah Carter believed that progress meant bringing people together, not tearing them apart," Maya began, her voice carrying across the crowd. "He believed that the color of a person's skin was less important than the content of their character and the strength of their dreams." In the crowd, she saw faces that had lived with this secret for years. Reverend Jackson wiped tears from his eyes. James Granger stood at the back, his expression a mixture of shame and relief that the truth was finally out. Elijah Carter and Thomas Granger died because they dared to imagine a different kind of future. A future where cooperation replaced competition, where partnership replaced prejudice. Today, we honor their memory by making that future real. Maya pulled out a folder containing new legal documents. I'm announcing the establishment of the Carter Granger Cooperative Farming Initiative. Using the settlement money from the Caldwell Industries lawsuit, we're going to purchase land and offer it to small farmers, black and white, young and old, who want to work together. The crowd stirred with excitement. Maya continued, "This isn't about the past anymore. It's about the future my grandfather dreamed of. It's about proving that what he died for wasn't in vain." 6 months later, Maya stood once again beneath the oak tree where she'd found her grandfather's wallet. But now she wasn't alone. 12 families had joined the cooperative, their children playing together in the same fields where Elijah had once dreamed of unity. The tree had been designated as a historical marker, with a bronze plaque that read, "In memory of Elijah Carter and Thomas Granger, who believed that progress begins when we work together, and whose dreams survived even when they could not." Maya had taken a leave of absence from her Atlanta law firm to oversee the cooperative's first year. Standing here now, watching families of different backgrounds working side by side, she understood why her grandfather had been willing to die for this vision. "You did it, grandfather," she whispered to the tree. "You changed everything after all." The black SUVs and threatening phone calls had stopped after Robert Caldwell's conviction. The federal investigation had cleaned out corruption that had festered for decades. And most importantly, the cooperative was thriving, proving that Elijah's dream of interracial partnership could work. As the sun set over the fields, painting the cotton rows the same gold her grandfather had seen 30 years ago, Maya felt a peace she'd never known. Some stories took generations to finish. Some truths took decades to surface. But justice, when it finally arrived, was worth the wait. The wallet in the tree had been more than evidence, it had been a message across time, a call to finish what love and courage had started. Maya had answered that call, and in doing so, had discovered that the most powerful legacy isn't what we inherit, but what we choose to do with the truth we uncover. In Millbrook County, the future had finally arrived, dressed in the dreams of a man who died believing tomorrow could be better than yesterday.